The rich bride looked at her maid of honor, and then she sneered. Her words cut deeper than anyone expected, but just seconds later, her father walked in. And what he said next left the entire wedding hall in stunned silence. This isn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong, it's about pride, respect, and the shocking moment when the truth finally comes to light. In today's video, you'll see how a single act of arrogance turned a joyful celebration into a powerful life lesson. You'll discover what really happened behind those perfect smiles, and how one man's unexpected words changed everything. Stay with me till the end, because this story holds more than just drama. It reveals a truth that too many people forget. Real worth isn't measured by wealth, but by the way we treat others. Welcome to today's story. Let's begin. Before we talk about the moment that silenced the wedding hall, let's go back to where it all began. Because behind every insult, behind every broken relationship, there's always a story shaped by pride, expectations, and the way people see the world. Before we talk about the wedding day, we need to understand who the bride was and who the maid of honor truly became in her shadow. The bride's name was Clara. Born into privilege, she had never known a day of struggle. Her father was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the city, respected, admired, and feared by many. Her mother, a woman of high society, was known for her elegance and her unshakable belief in status. From a very young age, Clara had been taught that wealth defines worth. That luxury isn't just comfort, it's identity. She grew up surrounded by marble halls, glittering chandeliers, and people who praised her every move. Birthday parties meant designer dresses. Vacations meant private jets. Compliments followed her everywhere, and so did expectations. She was told she was special, destined for greatness, and she believed it. But what Clara didn't realize was that comfort, when never challenged, can quietly turn into arrogance. It wasn't her fault, not entirely. It was how she was raised, how she was treated, and how no one ever dared to tell her that being rich didn't mean being right. Now, before we talk about the maid of honor, imagine the complete opposite world, a world where dreams didn't come wrapped in silver paper, but in hard work, late nights, and quiet faith. Her name was Lena. She came from a modest family who believed that kindness is the only wealth that never fades. Her father was a school teacher, her mother a nurse. Life had never handed her much, but she learned earlier that gratitude could make even the smallest things feel grand. Lena and Clara met when they were children. Back then, none of the differences between them mattered. They went to the same school, shared the same playground, and dreamed of growing up together. Clara liked Lena because she was simple. No jealousy, no judgment, just genuine friendship. And Lena liked Clara because, at least back then, Clara still laughed freely and didn't care about brands or money. Their friendship was easy, until time began to change them. Before we talk about the wedding preparations, it's important to see how those early cracks began to form. As they grew older, Clara's world grew bigger and shinier. Her family moved into a mansion. She started attending private schools filled with children of politicians and celebrities. Her conversations shifted from favorite cartoons to designer handbags and luxury vacations. Lena, on the other hand, stayed in the same neighborhood, helping her parents after school, working part-time, and saving for college. They still stayed in touch, but slowly, their friendship turned into something uneven. A friendship where one gave and the other expected. Clara began to see Lena as someone she could rely on, but not as an equal. She'd often say things like, "You're so lucky you get to live a simple life," without realizing the weight of her words. Lena would smile politely, swallowing her pride, because she didn't want to lose the only childhood friend she had left. Before we talk about the engagement, we should mention that Clara's dreams of perfection extended to every part of her life, including love. When she met Daniel, a wealthy young businessman from another elite family, it felt like destiny. Their engagement was the talk of the town, lavish, extravagant, and meticulously planned. Every magazine wrote about it. Every guest expected nothing short of a fairy tale wedding. When it came time to choose her maid of honor, everyone expected Clara to pick one of her rich friends, but she didn't. She surprised everyone when she chose Lena. Some said it was because she wanted to show she hadn't forgotten her roots. Others whispered that she wanted a contrast to make herself look even more elegant next to someone simpler. Whatever the reason, Lena was touched. She didn't think of image or gossip. To her, it was a gesture of love, proof that their bond still mattered. She accepted without hesitation, not knowing that this decision would put her right in the middle of a storm. Before we talk about the dress fittings and the endless planning, picture the two women standing side by side. Clara, glowing in silk and diamonds, surrounded by people who said yes to everything she demanded. Lena, quiet and patient, trying her best to keep up with the pace of a world she didn't belong to. At first, it went smoothly. Lena helped Clara with the details, calmed her down during stressful moments, and handled small tasks without complaint. But underneath that surface harmony, tiny sparks of tension began to appear. Clara started making little remarks. Harmless at first. "You don't need to worry about the dress, Lena. It's all on me. Or, you'll look fine. Just keep it simple." Her tone wasn't cruel, but her words carried the weight of someone who thought she was doing a favor. Lena ignored it. She told herself it was just stress. Weddings make people act strangely. But as days passed, the remarks grew sharper. "Maybe you shouldn't stand too close to me during photos. The colors might clash. Or, you don't really know how these things work. But it's okay. I'll handle it." Before we talk about the rehearsal dinner, let's pause for a moment to see what was really happening beneath the surface. Clara wasn't just preparing for a wedding. She was performing for society, for her parents, for every person who ever looked up to her family. Every detail had to scream perfection. Every person had to fit the image she had built in her mind. Lena didn't fit that image. She was kind, but she was also plain. Her dress wasn't designer. Her shoes weren't Italian. Her presence reminded Clara of a part of her life she didn't want people to see, the part before the glamour, before the pride. Still, Lena stayed. Not because she didn't notice the difference, but because she believed in loyalty. She thought maybe, just maybe, when the big day came, Clara would remember their bond and see her as the same friend from childhood. Before we talk about the morning of the wedding, imagine the contrast. The mansion buzzing with guests, makeup artists, photographers, and stylists rushing everywhere. And there, in the corner of the room, Lena quietly fixing the bride's veil, smiling despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Clara looked radiant, but her smile carried tension. The kind of smile that hides fear, control, and perfectionism. Everyone praised her beauty, her grace, her wealth. But no one praised her kindness, because somewhere along the way, it had faded into the background. As the ceremony approached, Clara became impatient. She snapped at people, gave orders sharply, and treated every delay like a personal insult. And yet, Lena remained calm, absorbing the chaos like a sponge, trying to keep peace around her. Before we talk about the insult itself, we have to understand the emotional distance that had already taken root. Clara wasn't looking at Lena as a friend anymore. She was looking at her as someone beneath her, someone who should be grateful to even stand beside her. And Lena, though hurt, still believed it was just nerves. That morning, while Clara sat in front of the mirror having her makeup done, she caught Lena's reflection behind her, wearing a simple pale dress, holding a bouquet of flowers she'd arranged herself. Clara stared for a moment, then said softly, "Lena, maybe next time you should let me pick your outfit. It doesn't quite fit the theme." The room went silent. Even the makeup artist paused. Lena froze, her cheeks burning. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the background like she always did. But before she could speak, Clara laughed it off, saying, "Oh, come on, I'm just joking." No one laughed. Before we talk about the moment her father appeared, we need to see how this tiny spark turned into something much bigger. Because this wasn't just about one cruel comment. It was the weight of years of difference, pride, and unspoken pain. And as the music started and the guests took their seats, Clara didn't realize that her own father, the man who taught her everything about power, was about to teach her one last lesson she'd never forget. Before we talk about the exact moment the insult shattered the room, we need to step into the hours leading up to it. The quiet, tense hours where small things began to pile up like invisible weights. The morning of the wedding was bright, but inside the bride's mansion, the air was thick. Every sound felt sharp. Every word carried pressure. Makeup artists whispered, photographers clicked endlessly, and stylists moved like they were walking on glass. Clara wanted perfection, not almost perfect, not close to perfect. Before we talk about what she said, it's important to see how exhaustion and ego built up inside her like a storm. The ceremony was scheduled for noon, but by 8 a.m. Clara was already restless. The florist had delivered the wrong shade of roses. The cake designer was running late. Even the makeup artist had used the wrong foundation shade. At least, that's what Clara thought. Lena tried to help. She ran back and forth, adjusting decorations, helping bridesmaids, making sure Clara had water. Every time something went wrong, Lena was the one who stepped in quietly to fix it. She never complained, never snapped back, even when Clara's tone turned sharp. "Lena, where's my bouquet?" "In the cooler. I'll bring it right now." "No, not that one. The bigger one. You don't understand how these things work." The words stung, but Lena stayed calm. She told herself it was just stress, that Clara would relax once everything started. But the truth was, Clara wasn't just nervous. She was afraid. Afraid that one small mistake would make her look weak. That one imperfect moment would ruin the image she had built her whole life around. Before we talk about the insult, let's look at the smaller moments. The kind that go unnoticed by others, but cut deeply for the person who feels them. When the bridesmaids posed for pre-wedding photos, Clara stood at the center, her smile bright and controlled. She turned slightly, adjusting her angle, then looked at Lena. "Could you step a little further to the side?" She said, "I just want the symmetry to look right." Lena did as she was told. No one else noticed, but Clara's request wasn't about symmetry. It was about appearance. She didn't want her plain, simple maid of honor too close to her in the frame. The photographers clicked away, capturing moments that looked joyful but felt hollow. Then came the dressing moment. Clara's mother, busy talking to guests, called out, "Clara, sweetheart, your train needs fixing." Lena rushed forward, kneeling behind her to adjust the long, heavy fabric. Clara didn't even look back. She simply said, "Be careful, don't wrinkle it. It's custom-made silk. You can't afford to damage that." The words hit harder than they sounded. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. A small pause before the word afford, a tone that sliced through the air like glass. The bridesmaids exchanged uneasy glances, but stayed silent. Lena's hands trembled slightly, but she kept adjusting the fabric. "Of course," she whispered. "Before we talk about the ceremony itself, we need to see the moment everything started to unravel." Clara was pacing near the large mirror, rehearsing her smile. The maid of honor handed her a glass of water, but Clara waved it away. No, I can't drink that. It'll ruin my lipstick." A few minutes later, the wedding coordinator approached with a small issue. The maid of honor's bouquet had fewer flowers than expected. It was a minor mistake, nothing anyone would normally notice. But to Clara, in her fragile, high-strung state, it felt like a disaster. She turned sharply toward Lena. "Did you even check your bouquet before today?" Lena blinked, surprised. I thought it looked beautiful. I didn't count the flowers." Clara's voice rose, just enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Of course, you didn't. You don't understand presentation. You think everything simple is good enough? But not today, Lena. Not today." Her tone wasn't playful. It was laced with something darker. Frustration mixed with pride. The makeup artist looked down. The hairstylist pretended to be busy. No one dared to step in. Lena lowered her gaze, her throat tight. She wanted to explain, to say she had stayed up half the night helping with decorations, but she couldn't. She knew anything she said would sound like an excuse. So she stayed quiet. Before we talk about the big insult, imagine the setting: the grand ballroom filled with golden light, music floating softly, guests turning their heads as the ceremony began. Clara walked down the aisle in shimmering white, holding her bouquet like a crown. Her father stood tall beside her, proud but calm, unaware of what was brewing beneath the surface. Lena followed a few steps behind, carrying her smaller bouquet, eyes downcast but smiling faintly. The moment looked perfect to everyone else, but inside, Clara's irritation hadn't faded. Every tiny thing seemed to annoy her. A bridesmaid walking too slowly, a flower, petala low, a whisper from the crowd. When the ceremony ended and the guests moved toward the reception hall, Clara's perfectionist mask began to crack. Someone spilled a drink near the entrance. A child laughed too loudly. The catering team mixed up the table numbers. It was chaos, disguised as celebration. Lena, noticing the growing tension, approached her softly. "Clara, don't worry. It's all fine. Everyone's having a good time." But that was the wrong thing to say. Clara turned to her, eyes sharp. "Fine. Do you even know what fine looks like, Lena? You wouldn't understand. This isn't one of your small-town parties." The words slipped out before she realized how cruel they sounded. But instead of stopping, she doubled down, frustration pushing her further. "Honestly," she said, her voice rising above the noise, "I don't even know why I made you my maid of honor. Look at you. Your dress doesn't fit the theme. You don't even know how to hold yourself. You're embarrassing me in front of everyone." The music didn't stop, but the conversations did. Heads turned, the bridesmaids froze. Someone at the buffet table coughed quietly. Clara's mother looked horrified. The coordinator took a step forward, unsure what to do, and Lena, she just stood there. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't blink. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet until the stems bent. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. The insult wasn't just words. It was a public stripping of dignity. A cruel reminder of everything Clara thought made her superior. Lena's eyes glistened, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of everyone. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered softly, though she had done nothing wrong. The guests started murmuring. Some looked away in discomfort. Others whispered behind their hands. The bride had humiliated her oldest friend, and everyone had seen it. Clara, still fuming, turned away, pretending nothing had happened. "Let's just move on," she muttered. "We're wasting time. Before we talk about what happened next, let's linger in that silence. That heavy, unbearable silence that filled the air after the laughter died." Lena stood near the edge of the hall, eyes fixed on the floor. Her vision blurred, but she forced herself not to break down. Her mind ran through every memory: childhood games, late-night talks, promises they'd made to stay close forever. And now, all of it felt like a lie. Her heart ached, not from anger, but from disbelief. How could someone who once called her sister speak to her like that? In front of strangers, the band started playing again, awkwardly, trying to bring life back to the room. But the warmth was gone. Guests avoided eye contact with the maid of honor. The bridesmaids whispered quietly, pretending to fix their makeup just to have something to do. Clara's father, who had been talking to a business partner across the room, noticed the strange stillness. He turned his head just in time to see his daughter brushing off her friend's pain like it meant nothing. Lena slowly placed her bouquet on a nearby table. She walked toward the exit, not in anger, but in quiet defeat. Each step felt heavy, as if the weight of years of friendship was pressing down on her shoulders. Before we talk about the father's arrival, we need to stay in this moment. The last few seconds of stillness before everything changed. The hum of voices, the clinking of glasses, the forced smiles. Clara's laughter returned, sharp and hollow, as if she wanted to erase what had just happened. "Come on, everyone," she said, waving her hand. "Let's toast to love, to happiness, to new beginnings." But no one raised their glass. The guests were too polite to say anything, but their eyes said enough. Some looked at her with pity, others with quiet disapproval. And somewhere in the back of the hall, a man's footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, and heavy with purpose. The music faltered once more. Clara turned, her smile frozen. Because in that moment, the father she thought would be proud of her, the man she had spent her whole life trying to impress, was walking toward her with a look she had never seen before. Before we talk about what the father said, we have to step into the exact moment the door opened, the moment when sound itself seemed to freeze. The air in the grand hall was heavy with silence. Glasses half raised, guests stood awkwardly, their laughter dying mid-sentence. The band had stopped playing without realizing it. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning filled the space. Then, from the far end of the room, came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps, the kind that draw attention without trying, the kind that carry authority even before a word is spoken. Before we talk about his expression, imagine this. The doors to the hall, tall and carved with gold patterns, swung open. The light from the corridors spilled in, framing the figure that stood there. Mr. Harrison, the bride's father, a man whose very presence commanded respect. He wasn't dressed for the moment he was walking into. Not like a man who wanted to make an entrance. He was simply returning from a brief conversation outside, unaware of the tension he was about to walk into. But as soon as he stepped through those doors, he felt it. The stillness, the uneasy faces, the way eyes darted from him to his daughter, then to the maid of honor standing frozen near the exit. Before we talk about his words, let's pause on that first look. He scanned the room slowly, calmly, his gaze sharp and searching. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to raise his voice to be heard. Silence itself bent toward him. He saw his daughter standing near the center, glass in hand, smile forced. He saw the guests, polite but uncomfortable, and then his eyes fell on Lena. Her shoulders were trembling ever so slightly, her eyes glassy, her bouquet abandoned on a nearby table. In that one glance, he understood everything. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. Years of raising a daughter, years of studying human nature in boardrooms and meetings, had taught him to read a room like a book, and this room was loud in its silence. Before we talk about what he said, notice how the energy shifted. The guests instinctively stepped aside, clearing a path for him. The whispers faded completely. Clara's hand tightened around a glass. She turned, a small, nervous smile creeping onto her face. "Daddy," she said, her voice softer than before, a tone that used to melt his sternness when she was a child. But this time he didn't. He didn't return the smile. He simply kept walking, toward her slow, steady steps that echoed against the marble floor. "Clara," he said finally. His voice was calm, not loud, not angry. Calm in a way that carried weight. Calm in a way that made everyone else still their breath. Before we talk about the meaning behind his tone, understand this. Calm can be more powerful than rage. It demands more respect, because it's the kind of calm that comes when disappointment runs deeper than anger. "What happened here?" he asked quietly. "Tagit, wasn't he?" Really a question. His eyes didn't leave his daughter's face. Clara's smile wavered. She tried to keep her composure. "Nothing, Daddy. We were just talking. Everything's fine." He raised an eyebrow slightly, just enough to make her falter. "Fine," he repeated, his voice measured. "That's what you call it." Before we talk about her reaction, we should see the power dynamic at play. For the first time that day, Clara wasn't in control. The crowd, once orbiting around her, now watched her father instead. Every gesture of his hand, every glance of his eyes, carried more weight than her entire performance of perfection. He turned his head slightly toward Lena. His expression softened, just a fraction. "Miss Lena," he said politely, his tone changing to one of quiet respect. "Would you mind telling me if everything is all right?" Lena shook her head quickly, wiping her eyes. It's nothing, sir. I didn't mean to cause," but he stopped her with a gentle gesture. "No, my dear, you didn't cause anything." The words fell like gentle thunder, soft, but impossible to ignore. Before we talk about the bride's face, picture how Clara's world began to tilt. For years, she had watched people bend to her teachers, assistants, even friends. But her father, he was the one person who never did. And that was what made his silence unbearable. "Clara," he said again, slowly. "I taught you many things. I gave you everything you ever wanted. But I didn't raise you to humiliate someone who stood by you when no one else did." The guests stirred. Some lowered their eyes, as if they were intruding on something private. Others watched, unable to look away. Clara's lips parted. I didn't she was. He lifted his hand slightly, stopping her. Don't, he said softly. Don't try to explain it away. I've been in enough rooms to know when pride has gone too far. Before we talk about the silence that followed, imagine the sound of her breathing, shallow, unsteady. The hand holding her glass began to tremble. For a moment, she looked less like a bride and more like a child caught in a mistake she didn't know how to undo. Her father stepped closer, his voice lowering. You invited her here not as decoration, not as a gesture of pity. You invited her because she was once your friend, a friend who knew you before all this. He gestured subtly to the chandeliers. The crowd, the luxury, before the noise, before the titles. Tell me, Clara, what happened to that girl? No one moved. The question wasn't meant to be answered aloud. It was meant to echo, to sink in deeper than any lecture ever could. Before we talk about Lena's expression, let's stay with the father for a moment. He wasn't just angry. He was heartbroken. He had spent his life building an empire for his family, but in doing so, maybe he had forgotten to teach his daughter that kindness matters more than image. He looked at Lena again. My dear, he said gently, I owe you an apology, one my daughter should have given, but didn't. Lena shook her head, her voice trembling. Please, sir, it's not necessary. But he interrupted softly. It is, because silence in the face of cruelty makes us all guilty. Those words hung in the air, heavy and unforgettable. Before we talk about how Clara's composure cracked, remember this was not a man who yelled. He didn't need to. His calmness made every word sharper. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Daddy, please, I didn't mean. He sighed, not out of anger, but exhaustion. Intent doesn't erase impact, he said quietly. You don't measure a person's worth by the fabric of their dress or the number of flowers in a bouquet. You measure it by their heart. The hall was utterly still. Even the waiters had stopped moving. It felt as if time itself had slowed to listen. Before we talk about the tension that filled the room, notice how the balance had shifted completely. Moments ago, Clara stood tall, her confidence unshakable. Now, she stood small before her father's calm gaze, the first true authority she'd ever faced that didn't yield to her. Her mascara was starting to run, her lips quivering. I just wanted everything to be perfect, she whispered. He looked at her with a mixture of sorrow and tenderness. Perfection isn't found in how things look, Clara. It's found in how people feel when they're with you. And right now, no one here feels proud to be part of this moment, not even you. Before we talk about the next part, we should see how those words settled into her. They weren't shouted. They weren't dramatic. They were simply true, and the truth, when spoken calmly, can cut deeper than any scream. She tried to meet his eyes, but couldn't. Her gaze fell to the floor. The grand dress, the sparkling jewels, the perfect hair. Suddenly, none of it mattered. It all felt like armor she didn't know how to take off. Her father turned slightly, looking toward the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his tone still steady. I believe celebrations are meant to bring people together, not tear them apart. Let's remember that, not just today, but always. The guests nodded quietly. Some even clapped softly, though no one smiled. It wasn't applause, it was agreement. Before we talk about what happened next, let's pause here. In this exact moment when the power shifted, when the proud became silent and the humble stood tall without saying a word, the father's presence had changed the air in the room. His calm voice had done what no confrontation could. It forced everyone, especially his daughter, to look inward, and somewhere in the corner, Lena, still shaken, still holding back tears, finally exhaled. For the first time that day, she didn't feel invisible. Before we talk about the father's words, we need to pause for a moment and understand the silence that filled the room. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat echo in your ears. Every guest was frozen in their seat. Some held their breath. Others exchanged nervous glances, trying to figure out what would happen next. The bride, still standing near the stage, turned her head slowly, her confident expression beginning to fade. She had no idea that the person who had just entered would completely change the course of that night. The father stepped forward, calm and composed, dressed in a simple but dignified suit. His presence carried weight, not because of power or money, but because of the quiet authority he carried. His eyes scanned the room, then settled on his daughter. For a brief second, there was no anger, only disappointment. The kind of disappointment that speaks louder than any shout. Everyone could feel it. Before we talk about what he said, imagine the scene. The decorated hall, the guests frozen in shock, the bride standing with her hand and the maid of honor still trembling, her eyes glistening with tears she hadn't wiped away. The music had stopped. The laughter that once filled the hall was gone. All that remained was the echo of words that should never have been spoken. The father took a slow breath. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, was calm but sharp. The kind that cut through noise and pride alike. "Is this how you speak to someone who stood by you all your life?" he asked. His tone wasn't loud, but each word carried weight. The bride's lips parted, as if to defend herself, but she couldn't find the words. For the first time that evening, she looked unsure of herself. Before we talk about the rest of his speech, think about what that question meant. It wasn't just about that one moment. It was about everything that came before it. The friendship, the years of shared laughter, the times the maid of honor had stood beside her. Even when the bride had nothing, the father remembered those days. He had seen that girl, the maid of honor, growing up in their home, helping his daughter study, sharing dreams, and giving without expecting anything in return. And now, to see her humiliated in front of hundreds of people, it broke something inside him. He took a step closer to the bride and said, "You might be wearing the most expensive dress in this room, but that doesn't make you the most important person here. Respect us." His words hung heavy in the air. Some guests nodded faintly, others lowered their eyes. The bride's face turned pale. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her gown. She looked like someone who had just realized her crown had slipped. Before we go deeper, remember, this wasn't a man trying to embarrass his daughter. This was a father trying to save her from herself. He wasn't speaking out of anger. He was speaking out of love, the kind of love that refuses to let pride destroy a good heart. He continued, his voice steady. "That girl you insulted," he said, pointing gently toward the maid of honor, "stood by you when no one else did. She believed in you when people mocked your dreams. And today, when you should be thanking her, you chose to humiliate her. Tell me, what does that say about you?" The bride's eyes filled with tears. The words hit her harder than any punishment could. Before we talk about how the crowd reacted, notice the power of silence again. No one dared interrupt. Even the waiters, who had been quietly moving between tables, stopped. You could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the faint rustle of a dress, the shaky breath of the maid of honor. The father turned toward the guests and said, "I apologize for what my daughter has said. No one deserves to be disrespected, no matter what they wear or where they come from." A murmur spread across the hall, not of gossip, but of reflection. Some people glanced at their own children, as if reminded of how quickly arrogance can grow when it's fed by privilege. The father's tone grew softer now. "Wealth can buy a wedding," he said, "but it can't buy class. Money can fill a hole, but it can't fill a heart. Remember that." Before we talk about the bride's reaction, let's stay with the father for a moment. His calm strength was what held the entire room together. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't insult his daughter. He simply spoke the truth in a way that left no room for denial. It was the kind of truth that stings but heals. The bride tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "I didn't mean," she began, but her father interrupted gently. "You did mean it, aisi softly. And that's what hurts the most. Because you've forgotten who you are." His voice trembled slightly. Not from anger, but from pain. He turned toward the maid of honor and said, "I'm deeply sorry for what happened. You deserve better. You always have." Before we talk about the effect these words had, imagine the maid of honor's face, a mix of relief and heartbreak. She tried to speak, to say it was okay, but no words came out. Her eyes said enough. She hadn't expected anyone to defend her, especially not in front of everyone. The father looked back at his daughter. "You may think success makes you powerful," he said, "but real power is in kindness. It's in lifting others, not pushing them down." The guests nodded quietly. Someone at the back whispered, "He's right." The bride stood frozen, her mascara starting to smudge as tears rolled down her cheeks. Before we move further, take note of how the energy in the room changed. The pride, the laughter, the judgment, all gone. What remained was reflection. Everyone was thinking of their own mistakes, their own words said in arrogance. The father's speech had touched something universal. The truth that no matter how high we rise, we must never forget where we came from. He placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "You can still fix this," he said quietly. "But first, you must learn to be humble." The bride's lower lip trembled. She turned her head slowly toward the maid of honor, who stood motionless, unsure of what to do. For the first time that night, their eyes met not as bride and helper, but as two souls caught in a moment of truth. Before we talk about what happens next, remember this moment. The father's calm voice, the bride's silent tears, the maid of honor's fragile heart. This was not just a correction. It was a lesson, one that would echo far beyond that wedding hall. The father didn't stay long after that. He looked around once more, meeting the eyes of the guests, and said, "Let tonight remind us that love without respect means nothing." Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than any music. Before we talk about what follows, the apology, the whispers, the reactions, we need to let this image settle. A father walking away after standing for what's right, a bride realizing the weight of her mistake, and a maid of honor standing in quiet grace, holding her dignity like a shield. There were no applause, no cheers, no dramatic endings. Just truth, simple, raw, and unforgettable. The kind that changes people long after the night is over. Before we talk about what happened next, let's return to that heavy silence left behind after the father's words. It wasn't just silence, it was the sound of realization, the kind that creeps into every corner of a person's mind, forcing them to confront who they truly are. The bride stood frozen, her face pale, her breath shallow. The laughter and arrogance that had once surrounded her were gone. Even the music that had been playing softly in the background seemed to have stopped, as if the entire hall itself was holding its breath. For the first time that night, the bride wasn't the center of admiration. She was the center of pity. People weren't looking at her with envy anymore. They were looking at her with something closer to disappointment. Before we talk about her next move, imagine her world at that moment. The shining lights, the hundreds of eyes watching, and the echo of her father's words still ringing in her ears. Her pride had shattered in front of everyone she had hoped to impress. Her hands trembled as she looked down, staring at the floor as if it could swallow her shame. She opened her mouth, but the words refused to come out. Before we talk about what she finally said, it's important to understand what was happening inside her. Anger and shame fought for space in her heart. She wanted to defend herself, to say it wasn't her fault, that she was just stressed, just overwhelmed, but deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She knew she had crossed a line that words could not easily erase. The maid of honor still stood near the edge of the stage, her eyes red from crying, her posture stiff. She hadn't moved since the father had left. Before we talk about her feelings, let's remember what she had endured that evening. Public humiliation, cruel words, and a spotlight she never wanted. But now, that same spotlight felt different. The crowd's judgment had shifted. Where they once pitied the bride's supposed unfortunate helper, they now respected her quiet strength. She hadn't spoken, hadn't argued, hadn't defended herself, and yet her silence had spoken louder than anyone's voice. The bride took a slow step forward, the sound of her heels echoing sharply against the marble floor. Each step felt like a confession. Before we talk about what she said, imagine how difficult that walk must have been. A woman used to admiration now facing humiliation. A daughter who had just been publicly corrected by her own father. When she finally stood in front of her maid of honor, her voice trembled as she whispered, "I'm sorry." But it wasn't the kind of apology that fixes everything instantly. It was broken, uncertain, fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind. She tried to continue, her voice cracking. I shouldn't have said those things. I don't know why I did. The maid of honor didn't respond right away. Her eyes studied the bride's face, searching for sincerity. She wanted to believe her. She really did. But the pain of those words still burned fresh in her memory. Before we talk about her reply, let's turn to the guests. Their whispers filled the hall, soft but unavoidable. Did you see her face? One murmure. She's finally realizing what she did. Another whispered. Her father was right. That girl didn't deserve it. The balance of the room had shifted completely. Moments ago, people had laughed at the bride's jokes and flattery. Now, they kept their distance, unsure of where to look. No one wanted to be seen encouraging arrogance anymore. The maid of honor finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. You hurt me, she said. Not just because of what you said, but because I thought you were my friend. Those words hit harder than any insult. The bride covered her face with her hands, tears streaming down, her shoulders shaking. She nodded quickly, almost desperately. I know, she whispered. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Before we talk about forgiveness, think about what it means in moments like this. It's not a simple word. It's a choice. One that takes strength, humility, and sometimes distance. The maid of honor looked down for a long moment before she said, I forgive you, but I can't forget this. Her tone wasn't cold. It was tired, the voice of someone who had carried too much for too long. The bride looked at her, hopeful yet broken, as if she understood that forgiveness didn't mean everything was okay again. Before we move on, let's not forget the people watching, the guests who now sat in uncomfortable silence. Some had tears in their eyes. Others avoided looking at either of the women, too ashamed to have laughed earlier when the bride's insults had first begun. The wedding, which had started as a celebration of love, had turned into a mirror reflecting everyone's own pride and judgment. The bride wiped her face and took a shaky breath. You were there for me when no one else was, she said softly. You helped me when I couldn't even help myself. I don't know why I let my ego destroy that. Her words weren't rehearsed. They came out messy, uneven, but they were real. The maid of honor nodded slightly. Sometimes people lose themselves, she replied quietly, but it's up to them to find their way back. Before we talk about what happened next, let's focus on the atmosphere. The tension in the air was finally beginning to soften. The sharpness that once filled the room was fading, replaced by something gentler. Reflection, empathy, even understanding. The guests could feel it too. Someone started clapping softly, unsure if it was appropriate. Then another joined, and another, until the hall filled with a slow, hesitant round of applause. Not for the bride, but for the truth that had been spoken. The bride turned slightly, scanning the crowd, her expression raw and humbled. She wasn't smiling anymore. There was no trace of the perfection she had tried to display earlier. What stood before them now was a human being stripped of pride, vulnerable, honest, and remorseful. Before we talk about the future of their friendship, it's important to note this moment of transformation. Sometimes, humility arrives not through lessons we read, but through pain we feel. The maid of honor stepped forward and reached out, gently touching the bride's arm. It wasn't a gesture of complete reconciliation, but it was one of understanding. Let's just get through the day, she whispered. The bride nodded quickly, grateful beyond words. For a moment, they stood there, two women who had once shared everything, now trying to rebuild something from the ashes of pride. Before we move further, imagine how the rest of the evening unfolded. The music started again, but it was softer this time. The laughter that returned carried a different tone, not careless, but cautious. Guests began to talk quietly about what had happened, and in their whispers, lessons formed. Money really does change people, someone said, but at least she realized it before it was too late. Another replied. The bride's father, standing quietly near the exit, watched from a distance. His expression was calm now. He didn't need to say anything more. His message had already taken root. The bride caught sight of him and bowed her head slightly. A silent gesture of gratitude and apology all at once. He gave her a small nod before turning away, letting her face the consequences and the healing on her own. Before we talk about whether the friendship survived, let's understand what both women carried after that day. The bride carried guilt not just for her words, but for realizing how easily she had lost sight of what truly mattered. The maid of honor carried scars, not visible ones, but emotional ones, born from being hurt by someone she trusted most. Weeks later, they met again, not in a grand hall, but in a small cafe. The bride had called, asking for a chance to talk. Before we dive into their conversation, imagine the scene. No cameras, no guests, no fancy dresses. Just two people sitting across from each other. The air heavy, but honest. "I've been thinking about that day," the bride said softly. "I wish I could take it back." The maid of honor smiled faintly. "You can't," she said, "but you can make sure it never happens again." Before we end this part of the story, remember, reconciliation doesn't always mean everything goes back to how it was. Sometimes, it means understanding each other in a new way. The bride didn't expect things to be perfect again. She didn't ask for blind forgiveness. She simply wanted to rebuild trust, slowly, piece by piece. That night at the wedding hall had changed more than just two people. It had reminded everyone watching that respect is more valuable than diamonds, and humility shines brighter than gold. And while the music eventually played again, and the guests went home, the lesson stayed. Quiet, powerful, and unforgettable. Before we talk about the moral, remember this moment, not as the end of a story, but as the beginning of change. The kind of change that comes when someone finally learns that love, in all its forms, cannot exist without respect. Before we talk about the moral of this story, let's go back for a moment to that single second when the bride looked at her maid of honor with disdain. That one small act set everything in motion. It was just a few careless words, spoken in arrogance, but they revealed something much bigger than a misunderstanding at a wedding. They revealed how easily pride can blind us, how quickly people forget where they came from, and how fragile respect truly is when it's built on wealth and appearance instead of character. Before we talk about what this story truly teaches, picture that wedding hall. Again, the lights, the laughter, the perfection. It all looked flawless until the truth cracked through the surface. And that's how life often works. We spend so much time trying to build images of success, of luxury, of status, forgetting that none of it matters if our hearts grow cold. The moment the bride insulted the maid of honor, she didn't just humiliate another person, she exposed the emptiness behind her own smile. Before we dive deeper, let's talk about something everyone can relate to. The idea that wealth protects you. So many people believe that money, power, or social status can shield them from the consequences of their actions. But this story reminds us that it doesn't. Wealth can hide your flaws for a while, but it can't erase them. It can impress people, but it can't win their respect. True respect can't be bought. It's earned in moments when no one is watching, in how you treat those who can't offer you anything in return. The bride learned that the hard way. She had everything: the perfect wedding, the perfect dress, the perfect crowd. Yet she lacked the one thing that truly defines a person: humility. Before we talk about her transformation, remember that wealth itself isn't evil. The problem begins when people start confusing wealth with worth. When they start believing that money makes them better than others. The father's words shattered that illusion. And not just for his daughter, but for everyone watching that night. He reminded the room, without shouting or anger, that true dignity doesn't come from what you wear or how much you own. It comes from the quiet way you speak to a waiter, the gentle tone you use with someone beneath your status, the kindness you show when no one's filming. That is what separates arrogance from grace, and that's what this story is really about. Before we talk about the maid of honor's part in this lesson, think about her silence. She didn't argue, didn't lash out, didn't try to prove herself. She simply endured, with grace, with dignity, with quiet strength. In doing so, she became the most powerful person in the room without ever raising her voice. Sometimes, the loudest message is the one spoken in silence. The maid of honor reminded everyone of something the world often forgets. Humility is not weakness. Patience is not submission. Choosing not to respond to cruelty doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you know your worth doesn't depend on someone else's opinion. Before we talk about the father's wisdom, let's pause on this. In that moment, the maid of honor carried herself with more dignity than the bride, despite having less wealth, less recognition, and fewer people on her side. Now, before we explore the father's role, imagine how rare it is for someone to step in and correct a loved one publicly, not out of anger, but out of love. His words weren't meant to embarrass his daughter. They were meant to wake her up. He understood that letting pride go unchecked only feeds the monster within. And sometimes, a parent's intervention, even if it hurts, is the only thing that can pull someone back before they lose themselves completely. Before we go deeper into his wisdom, think about the courage it took. Most people would have stayed silent. It's easier to avoid conflict, to pretend nothing happened, especially at an event meant to be joyful. But he chose to speak up because he knew silence in the face of disrespect is the same as approval. That's another lesson hidden within this story. Real love isn't about protecting someone from shame. It's about protecting their soul from arrogance. The father's words carried values that today's world desperately needs to remember: humility, respect, and empathy. He reminded everyone that true class doesn't show in diamonds or designer clothes. It shows in how you treat people when no one else is looking. Before we move forward, let's think about what he said to the maid of honor. You deserve better. You always have. That sentence carried the weight of truth. A truth so simple yet so often forgotten. Before we talk about the guests and how they were affected, realize that every person in that hall walked away changed. The bride's humiliation, the father's calm authority, the maid of honor's grace. All of it became a quiet mirror reflecting the flaws and strengths in everyone watching. Some guests felt shame for laughing earlier. Others felt admiration for the father's strength. But one thing was clear. No one left that night without learning something about respect. The guests learned that wealth may open doors, but kindness opens hearts. They saw that cruelty, no matter how small, always finds its way back to the one who gives it. Before we continue, picture the guests whispering among themselves. Not gossiping this time, but reflecting. Parents whispering to their children. That's how you should speak to people. Friends saying, "Did you see how calm her father was?" Even the servers who had been silently walking around felt a quiet sense of justice. Someone had finally spoken up for kindness. Before we talk about the deeper message, think about the father's calmness again. He didn't need to shout to make his point. He didn't humiliate his daughter. He guided her back to humility. That's real strength. That's leadership. The world often mistakes dominance for power, but this story shows the opposite. True power lies in restraint, in calm correction, in the ability to stand up for what's right without cruelty. Before we explore the emotional transformation that followed, think about how the bride must have felt afterward, stripped of her illusions, yet somehow lighter. Sometimes, losing your pride feels like losing everything, but it's actually the first step toward finding yourself. The shame she felt that night wasn't punishment. It was purification. It tore away the layers of arrogance she had built around herself. The maid of honor, too, walked away changed. Not bitter, but wiser. She learned that not everyone who stands beside you will understand your worth. But she also learned something greater, that you don't need everyone to see your value to know it's there. Respecting yourself is sometimes the only shield you have, and it's often enough. Before we talk about the broader meaning, imagine this story happening anywhere else. At a workplace, in a school, in a friendship. The setting might change, but the message stays the same. No one is too important to be humble, and no one is too small to deserve respect. Every person carries a story, a struggle, a dignity that should never be trampled under someone else's pride. The father's intervention reminds us that wisdom doesn't always come from books or speeches. Sometimes it comes from the courage to speak truth at the right moment. And sometimes that truth saves not just one person's dignity, but another's soul. Before we talk about what we, as viewers, can take from this, let's remember how rare it is to witness such honesty. In a world obsessed with appearances, watching someone choose integrity over image is both shocking and inspiring. Before we move forward, let's look at the three hearts that define this story. The bride's heart, blinded by pride. The maid of honor's heart, wounded but pure. And the father's heart, steady and wise. Each of them played a part in reminding us that money and status can fade, but character never does. The bride had to lose her pride to rediscover her humanity. The maid of honor had to endure pain to show what real strength looks like. And the father had to speak the truth to restore balance between them. Before we talk about how this story applies to real life, ask yourself, how often do we stay silent when someone disrespects another person? How often do we judge people based on appearance or wealth? How often do we forget that every person deserves kindness, not because of who they are, but simply because they are human? This story forces us to look inward and ask, would I have spoken up like the father did? Or would I have laughed along, like the guests at first? Before we talk about what we can learn as individuals, realize that humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of others more. It's about understanding that every person you meet knows something you don't, fights battles you can't see, and deserves a basic level of respect. The father understood that lesson, and through his words, he taught everyone in that hall, including his daughter, that true greatness starts with kindness. Before we end this reflection, remember this. Wealth is temporary. Beauty fades. Status changes. But the way you treat people, that's what defines you, long after you're gone. The maid of honor might not have had riches, but she had something far more valuable: integrity. The bride had to lose everything for a moment to finally understand that, and the father, be stepping in, reminded everyone that sometimes the right words at the right time can change not just a person, but an entire room. Before we close, keep one image in your mind. The father's calm eyes, the maid of honor's quiet strength, and the bride's tear-streaked face. That moment captured what no amount of luxury could buy: truth. And in the end, that's the real treasure hidden in this story. Not the diamonds, not the dress, not the party, but the rediscovery of respect, humility, and love that no one can put a price on. In the end, what began as a moment of arrogance turned into a lesson no one in that hall would ever forget. A rich bride's pride shattered when her own father stood up for the very person she had humiliated. Respect and kindness proved to be stronger than wealth and status, and that truth echoed louder than the wedding music itself. Before we end, let me ask you this. If you were there, would you have defended the maid of honor, or stayed silent like the others? Your answer says a lot about the kind of person you are. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us what truly matters in life: respect, humility, and love. Thank you for watching, and remember, every act of kindness leaves a mark that money can't buy.